Okay, good morning, everybody. Today, we'll just continue with our study of a small piece of Dogen Zenji's Bendowa, of course. And this is usually referred to as the Jijuyu Zanmai section, or the self-receiving and self-employing samadhi. So we're at a part here that's interesting. The whole thing is interesting, of course, but I'll read the part that we're talking about right now. So Dogen, thank you, Mahesh. Actually, I'm able to record it on my phone. So last time I said I was going to give up, but actually I realized that I didn't give up. So hopefully that turns out. Yeah. Thank you for reminding us, though, because often we forget. Sometimes we forget to record. So, okay, so the piece here that Dogen Zenji wrote, this is Dogen Zenji here, of course, talking about what happens in our Zazen practice, what is going on. And he's talking about it from many different perspectives in this Jijuyu Zanmai piece, as he does, often. He shifts perspective from the person sitting to all beings, the perspective of all beings to the reality beyond the individual and the universal. So here he's been talking about the Jijuyu Zanmai from the perspective of the person sitting, person sitting Zazen. And he actually shifts in this one piece to another perspective. So anyway, at this part, he says, therefore, this Zazen person without fail drops off body and mind, cuts away previous tainted views and thoughts, awakens genuine Buddha Dharma, universally helps the Buddha work in each place, as numerous as atoms, where Buddha Tathagatas teach and practice, and widely influences practitioners who are going beyond Buddha, thereby vigorously exalting the Dharma that goes beyond Buddha. So in this part, he starts talking about, as I said before, it's many weeks now in a row, this mutual assistance between the person sitting and all beings, all things in the Dharma realm. So we're at the point where we just talked about dropping off body and mind, cutting away previous tainted views and thoughts. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about this awakens genuine Buddha Dharma first. So, and then we can talk a little bit too about Buddha work, I think, universally helping the Buddha work. So this place, this awakens genuine Buddha Dharma. I was kind of surprised when I saw this at first, because I'm using, of course, my teacher's translation, and he translated this word show, which he usually translates as verification, as awakens. So I have a copy that he gave out during one of his Genzo-A's that has the Japanese, kanji in it, which I can't read, but I can put it in a dictionary, and the definition comes up. But some of these, just a very few words, I'm familiar with, the kanji, and because he used them so often in his teaching. But these three words are often, translated as satori. There's three different words that are not translated as satori, but can mean satori in Japanese. And the root of those words has, three different roots. And so sometimes, depending on the type of writing system that Dogen Zenji is using, we're not sure which word he's actually referring to when he just says Satori. But anyway, here the word is sho, which usually it's a different sho than in shohaku or shoryu. It usually means it's translated as something like enlightenment, or as I say, my teacher usually translates it as verification. So the other words that are sometimes used are kaku, which means to awaken. It's like we're awakening from a dream. And so that's what he's used awaken here. And I was curious about why he did that. Because it's the word that's usually translated as verification. But there's another word, go, that is also, means enlightenment. Sometimes people translate as enlightenment. And this has the sense, apparently, of having a clear direction, knowing, understanding what one is encountering before oneself, and having a clear direction in which way to proceed with that encounter. Understanding, knowing which direction to walk in our life, and having a clear, vision of how to practice and how to live our life. And that, that is go. So anyway, I actually emailed him, and he said that he translated this many years ago, and that now he would actually translate it as verification. And he couldn't remember why he translated it as awakening. There might have been some reason, there might have been something in the context that made him do that. And I was curious, but he couldn't remember. It was many years ago, and now before he kind of established the way he would translate all of these words. So, but it's still an interesting thing to say that we awaken, or that we verify genuine Buddha Dharma. So the word, this word verify or show is usually, a very traditional Buddhist word that means we hear the Dharma, for example, and then we practice it. We think about it. We hear a Dharma talk, or we hear a teaching, or we read a sutra, or somehow learn some principle, or learn the Dharma itself, and then we reflect on it, and then we put it into action, and then we practice it, and then our awakening is the verification of the teaching and the practice. That's one sort of aspect of what people say enlightenment is, or that's a translation that's often used. This is enlightenment, the verification of your awakening, or of your enlightenment, the fruit of your practice. So, Dogen Zenji is saying, of course, that the practice of Zazen itself is the fruit of our practice. The total culmination, the verification, the end and the beginning, all at once. So, but it's interesting that he uses this word genuine, Buddha Dharma, because the word genuine is here. I didn't write down how to pronounce the actual Japanese word, but it doesn't matter that much. It means something like reality as it is, or actuality. I think probably like thusness. The Sanskrit word would probably be, I think, tatha. I'm not sure how to pronounce Sanskrit, but undefiled, pure, or just things as they are, the reality. And it can also be kind of a an adjective, like completely, truly, or it also can mean path, the path to awakening. And so I think all of these things apply to this genuine, as Dogen Zenji uses it. The path itself is thusness. The path and the practice and the awakening are the reality as it is. So the word Buddha Dharma, usually the traditional way of talking about that is the teaching of the Buddha. That's Buddha's teaching, Buddha Dharma. And in Zen, and especially in Dogen Zenji's, teaching, we understand that this Buddha Dharma is really one thing, or beyond one and two. The teaching of the Buddha, the reality that the Buddha manifested or woke up to, and the practice of the Buddha and the Buddha himself. All of those things are one seamless reality of Buddha Dharma. And so I think, Dogen Zenji really emphasizes that when he says, the genuine, the Buddha Dharma that is thus, and all of these things, beyond subject, object, and verb, the practice and the thing being practiced are one thing, or beyond one and two, in our Zazen. So the thing is, it has a personal, a personal aspect too, because that's the verification or the fruit of our awakening. Of course, we know very well that the Dogen Zenji's teaching is not about, having some goal, but it's not about saying there's no enlightenment. That's absolutely not Dogen Zenji's teaching. So the enlightenment is verified, realize we are released, when we sit Zazen. And that itself is enlightenment. And so, usually we create the suffering or something, this body and mind, these five skandhas, clinging to the five skandhas and clinging to past and future, create this suffering. Because, we're worrying about something that happened in the past, or regretting it, or being angry or resentful about it. And we're worrying and being concerned and anxious about the future. But Zazen is just being here, right now. And that is, thusness. That is enlightenment. And we can do this beyond the cushion. So try it sometime. You probably all have tried it. If you're walking around in a crappy mood, or if you're walking around fretting about something, if you're walking around depressed, I'm not saying this is a curative for clinical depression or anything, of course, but in any one moment, just relax and let go, and allow Zazen to enter. What is Zazen? It's the present moment, here and now. And we're released from our suffering. So often I say, during a sesshin, it's very important, very apparent for me, for example, because we're not doing anything but sitting there all day, staring at a wall. So you might, I might start out with some big anxiety the first day, or something happened that was difficult and is kind of coloring my entire world. And by the end of that day, by the end of the period, by the end of the 5 days, I may not even remember what it was that was such a weight and so horrible and terrible. So, and that is because all of these things, the real suffering is in our thinking and our feeling and grasping those things. It's in our body too. It's in all of the five skandhas, but we grasp it. So pain is not the same as suffering. So we might have deep pain, but we don't. Suffering and clinging to that pain is where real suffering, comes in. So that's what he's part of what he's saying here. This genuine Buddha Dharma, the fruit of awakening, the awakening of all things, is realized when we let go in Zazen, when we open the hand of thought, as Ucham Roshi said. And we can do that often to Christian too. That's our endeavor, is to do everything as part of our Zazen, as I often say. We don't do Zazen to make our life better. We don't do Zazen to become more calm or, to somehow become wiser, but we live our life in order to express Zazen, because Zazen is the only thing that really can purely express enlightenment. As long as we have these five skandhas going in any realm, some way, there's some difficulty. Unless we let go of them. It's not like we're going to get rid of the five skandhas, but unless we don't grasp them as me and as real and as truth. And that's what we do in our Zazen. So, when we face our problems with not doing this, we have much more wisdom and much more clarity about how to actually encounter what we're facing. So when we do this, we really put blinders on, and we're living up here. But when we let go, the entire universe is there, before us. We're not before us, but because we're in it, of course. But okay, so I'll go on a little bit more here. So I'll just say, we'll see how much time I have to say about this. So he says that in our Zazen, it universally helps the Buddha work. So Buddha work, I think, is a reference to chapter 27 of the Lotus Sutra. Dogen Zenji was very much influenced, by the Lotus Sutra, of course. And I think this is the same chapter that talks about the one great reason for which all Buddhas appear. And the reason they appear is to carry out Buddha work. So kind of a tautology, but what is this Buddha work? To awaken people, awaken sentient beings to the reality. And that's the work of the Buddha. That's why they're a Buddha, and that's what they do. It's their job. That's just what makes them a Buddha. So I think, actually it says in the version I have is to show the Buddha wisdom to living beings and enlighten them to it. That's the Buddha work. So that's what Dogen Zenji is saying our Zazen does. So, one way we can talk about this is just by looking at the historical Buddha and what he did. What did he teach? He was doing the Buddha work. He taught about impermanence, and he taught about non-self. And in Mahayana Buddhism, we, this non-self, we take a little more explicit expansion of the words and say interconnection. So interconnection also can mean non-self or universal self, but there's no particular independent thing called me that lasts without relationship to something else that is permanent and lasting. And that's what the Buddha, basically the reality that the Buddha said we need to awaken to. So, when we act in our life based on delusion that we are somehow permanent, or that somehow, things can go our way if we just manipulate them enough, we have deep suffering. But the things themselves, are actually always teaching us. We're not listening. We're trying to struggle and get those things to go the way that we want them to go. But that doesn't, we have a little bit of leeway where we can, it seems like we have some say in this, a few things. I mean, it's we don't want to talk about free will or anything. It's not the point of this, but probably we all had some choice in showing up for a Dharma talk today, or we could have gone swimming, or we could have gone, shopping or whatever. But we came to practice the Dharma together. So there is something that if we don't practice, there's no understanding whatsoever. So anyway, one of the beautiful things I think that the Lotus Sutra says is that, I think it's implied in the Lotus Sutra that everything is expounding Dharma. Everything is teaching us, and everything is impermanent. Everything is always changing. But we usually don't like that, But actually, that is what allows us to awaken. We want certain things to be the same, and we want other things not to be the same. But it doesn't work that way. So usually when we look in the mirror and we see that we're getting older, we look like we're older than we were 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 20 years ago, we think that's sad, that's a problem, that's no good. And a lot of the reason for that, I think, frankly, is that our culture is so youth-oriented, especially Western culture. Beauty, the standards of beauty all revolve around youth. There's all kinds of programs for self-improvement, creams, cosmetics, lotions, potions, diets, on and on and on to make us look and feel younger. Other societies, I think, especially in the past, revered, elderly people, the elders, and it wasn't a bad thing to get old necessarily. But for much of this culture, it's considered a bad thing. Not for everyone, of course, but the pervasive kind of sentiment, I think, in pop culture and marketing is to make us want to feel like we're younger. So, but actually, we can look in the mirror and say, my face is expounding the Dharma, actually. And this is an opportunity, to awaken to the fact that everything is impermanent, including me. And how do I, address this reality of impermanence and interconnection? So that, if we never aged or didn't change, of course, we wouldn't, externally, it would be much harder to practice. I think when things are going well, when things are easy, sometimes it's harder, to practice. But it doesn't change the reality of, the root of our suffering. So we encounter something that we want to go away, and it doesn't go away. You encounter a traffic jam, and you want that to go away. You want that to be impermanent. And, but it doesn't work. But what is that opportunity for you in that moment? That's, one of the paramitas, the patience the Buddha taught about, addressing suffering and our own suffering, the suffering of others by practicing patience, understanding what we have to accept and what we can't change and what we, can change. But again, it's the root of time, the time and impermanence and wanting it to go our way is, the root of that suffering. So, at the risk of sounding cliched or Pollyannish, it's really true that the traffic jam is expounding Dharma, though, and giving us an opportunity, to awaken. And this is one of the things that the Lotus Sutra says when we study it, is that, the Buddha really didn't go away. He's always expounding the Dharma. He just kind of, it's a skillful means for him to go away, go into your parinirvana. And I think that actually means, it doesn't mean, we have to think of some supernatural thing. It means that the reality that, the Dharma and the teaching, the reality itself never go away. As I said, genuine Buddha Dharma, these are one seamless thing. It seems like Shakyamuni showed up on this earth for a while and then disappeared. And on one level, that's true. But on another level, his teaching and the reality that he taught are always here with us, always expounding the Dharma. And that's, we call that in the Lotus Sutra, they call it the eternal lifespan of the Tathagata, I think is the name of one of the chapters there. And, many of us are familiar with the three bodies of Buddha and the Dharmakaya Buddha. But, so that's, I think, Dogen Zenji is making a reference to that here, and also giving us an opportunity to awaken when we are allowing us to see that, of course, he's not giving us the opportunity, but through his teaching, allowing us, to remember and see that everything is expounding Dharma, and every opportunity, every moment, there is an opportunity to awaken. And that's part of what he's saying, I think, by boundless Tathagatas, innumerable Tathagatas in every place, as innumerable as atoms, expounding the Dharma in our Zazen. Because our Zazen is just this, without all of the stories and all of the difficulty and the grasping and all of the things that create our deep suffering. So that's what he's talking about here, I think, with the Buddha work and in our Zazen. So, this Jijuyu Zanmai sounds like a sort of supernatural teaching, but, it's just talking about the reality, I think, on some level of just here and now, and the reality of how we awaken to that. Let's see. See if there's anything else I wanted to make sure I said about this. I think that's probably about enough for today. And I'll probably talk about the Buddha work and stuff a little bit more next time. So, I'll stop talking here and see if there's any comment or any question about what we said today. Yoho, had something?
Yeah. Thank you for your talk. That was really good. And I guess what kind of came up for me is so is nature, would you say, inherently already there in terms of being verified? Um, and is it just human beings that are kind of in the dark here, where we have to kind of come and understand what's going on? Or is it that you have to be conscious, such as human beings, to be able to understand what's going on and verify? Like, so that's kind of what I'm trying to understand is are we just the last one at the show, or are we unique in that respect?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's probably a good thing to sort of study, because I think there's a lot of different perspectives and opinions about that. There's kind of the traditional, the super traditional, or the early teaching would be like, well, you really can only attain enlightenment in the human realm. That's why it's such a rare thing and such a a special thing that we need to appreciate and take advantage of, because all of these other realms, you don't really have the opportunity to see, to encounter the Buddha Dharma, and even in like the heavenly realm, the Deva realm, things are going so well that you don't want anything to change, and you actually don't even see impermanence, that because you stay there so long that sooner or later you will fall down into one of the other realms. So that's one way of thinking of it. I think as I say, I think there's many different ways that we could talk about it, but Dogen Zenji, and me in particular too, I'm not so interested, or I think that maybe not interested. I am interested. It's interesting to think about the theory, but the real place where the rubber meets the road is just how this applies to us in our life, And as far as the theory as to whether human beings are the only beings capable of enlightenment or not is interesting, but maybe not. We can get hung up on that. And I think in Mahayana Buddhism and in Chinese Buddhism and Pure Land Buddhism and Keigon Buddhism, this idea that all things participate in enlightenment or in one universal life became much more kind of explicit, and that when we kind of set animals out in a different realm and say that's they can't be enlightened, or they can, we're kind of making them into an object, as where this one life that we all share together really goes beyond that. So I think some suttas or some Mahayana sutras say that inanimate objects can be enlightened and some can't, or some say they can't. But like this sort of original enlightenment teaching that Dogen Zenji formed his practice in. He was ordained as a Tendai monk, and Tendai teaching, I think at that time, I haven't studied Tendai so much, but it really was rooted quite a bit, at least during this time period, in this theory of original enlightenment. This is the kind of thing that we hear about Dogen Zenji questioned, that everything is already inherently enlightened. So birds are already enlightened. Human beings, everything in some original pure state is already enlightened. And so, Dogen Zenji really had a question of, well, if that's so, why do we have to practice if we're enlightened? And whatever we do is just Buddha activity. And he has supposedly what he went to China to find out was why do we have to practice. And of course, what he taught, what he learned, and what he teaches is that enlightenment is expressed. Enlightenment. If we say that we don't have to practice because everything is enlightened, that is deep, deep delusion. But it takes on one perspective, everything is enlightened, and on another perspective, we're deeply deluded. And so the problem is, of course, that the human mind says it has to be one or the other. And that's kind of what this original Enlightenment theory, really stuck to this point of everything is enlightened, everything's empty, everything's one body of Buddha. So any expression whatsoever is Buddha activity. And Dogen Zenji was vehemently against that perspective, and he thought it was the most profound misunderstanding of the Dharma that one could possibly take, almost, So, but if we don't understand on some level that everything is Buddha, we also have a problem too, because then we get into dogmas and judgments, and we think we know and they don't know, and we have the real Dharma and they don't, and we know what Buddha is and they don't know what Buddha is. So sometimes I think Monty is much more, a much more aware being than I am, or anybody I've met. Sometimes my dog, Monty, but sometimes he chases squirrels and he kills them for no good reason, too. And to those poor squirrels, he's a monster that's destroyed their family. To me, he's my beautiful, loving border collie. But to those squirrels, he destroyed their life, So I think that's part of Dogen Zenji's teaching too. It really depends on our perspective. And we can't take every perspective at once, even though we want to, there's always another perspective from which to see things and to say, well, everything, squirrels are actually enlightened or not. It's not really the way life unfolds, it's not the way we really encounter life. But theoretically, it's interesting, but I think Dogen Zenji and the Buddha really didn't want to create a theory, a system. The Abhidharma and stuff that arose after the Buddha was gone. Although some people say that's not so, he never systematized his teaching and said, what is the higher teaching? He contradicted himself, just as Dogen Zenji does. Because life is contradictory and we need different teachings and different medicine for different situations and different beings. And once we say this is the way it is for all beings, we have a problem, because somebody else comes from a different culture or a different time period or a different ethnicity, and it's not the reality for them. But on the other perspective, though, there has to be some fundamental Buddha Dharma, or else we're in nihilism, of course. So that's why we have this relative and absolute truth, and we have the Kaccayana Sutta, where a middle way is neither grasping eternalism nor impermanence. So I'm sorry I didn't have a very good answer, really, or very definitive answer for that, but that's what I would say.
No, I appreciate that. It kind of what it set or kind of helped in my brain is that yes, human beings can be conscious of the fact that they are creating their own suffering. And I don't necessarily think that my cats understand that they might be creating their own suffering, you know. And I might be able to help them out, but they're just either happy or not. Like they're, you know, they're not like, oh, if I just do this, then I won't suffer. So
Yeah.
I think that helps. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you. You know, I think it's something I think about a lot, because nature is cruel, and if you know, we kind of idealize nature, and Dogen Zenji, I think, loved nature too. He used the metaphors, and I mean, he just used it a lot in Japanese Buddhism. You know, Japanese culture, they love nature, and so this idea of it being evil or samsara is just, you know, hard, I think, for certain cultures to accept. But anyway, when you, again, I think it goes along with the perspective we take, because if you see like a bird catch, you know, a mouse or something, like you see a hawk catch a mouse or something, it looks pretty painful, you know, it looks pretty horrible. Or you see a lion catch an antelope or something like that. To our human mind, it seems like horrible. But from a broader perspective, you know, we know, of course, now ancient people knew this anyway, and indigenous peoples now, you know, didn't lose their wisdom as much as I think we did, is that this cycle of interconnection of predator and prey, and giving and receiving is the way life is, and the only way that we can exist, you know. So for that individual being, that mouse, it was painful. We don't know if he or she was suffering or not. Maybe animals don't suffer. They might be enlightened. They just do what they're doing. Or the whole idea of enlightenment and delusion is a human concept, you know. It's we forget it, you know. It's something we came up with, but so they don't care, probably, but it, you know, anyway. But from a broader perspective, that's Buddha work, you know, going on, and we have to kill in order to survive. We human beings, we have a precept against killing, but we can't survive without killing. Life consuming other living beings. So the distinction between life and death is really fluid, and one doesn't exist without the other. You know, we even if we're vegetarians, we are involved in the killing, you know, living beings in farming or whatever it is. You know, you can never extricate yourself from the web of killing completely, no matter how much you try. So it's an interesting question, but very difficult to give a definitive answer. But I think one thing we say is that there's always a different way to see things, or there's usually a different way to always perceive anything. Okay, Lacey has something.
Yeah, as you were talking, one thing that I thought about was Buddha saying, I together with all beings attain the way. So I wondered if you could talk about that, because as you were talking, it occurred to me that I had never really thought of that phrase as kind of possibly that he was implying a bit of responsibility, maybe, to do our right, to do. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, absolutely. That's a very good illustration of this teaching, I think. In Dogen Zenji, you know, used that as a way to expound the Dharma, that I together with all beings attain the way. So yeah, it's not just an expression of complete non-self, that there's no Shakyamuni. So there was, from one perspective, a Shakyamuni, and he went through various deep, practices, and he took responsibility for finding out the end. What is life, and what is the end of suffering? How do I address this life and live well? But ultimately, what he learned was in that, that expression, that this individual person cannot address the issue alone as this deluded, this delusion of a separate self that can extricate himself or herself alone from this suffering. But unless, the individual does their own work, there's no way for them to understand that. So I often talk about the analogy of a symphony. And so maybe the Buddha was the conductor in this case, because but without the orchestra, there's no way a conductor is gonna, Beethoven would be nothing without violinists or pianists, Mozart, the great geniuses, but without all the people who came before them and all the people who wrote, expressed their music, there's no Mozart, he could have just played it himself, I guess, on a violin, but that's not the heights that he reached. Of course, were with a bigger body of participants, and not only the participants who played his music when he was alive and after he was dead, but all the ones who came before him to, all the people who played violin and handed it down, and he studied, and even though apparently he was a prodigy, a genius, but he wouldn't have been able to express that without other musicians and without, an orchestra. But unless, and the other thing though was, and if he hadn't written it down, if he hadn't had an interest in music, or if he hadn't lived his life the way he did, we wouldn't have the expression either. So the orchestra, another person, the drum, person playing the big drums, they have a very simple role, it seems to us sometimes. They're just striking a certain drum, and all of these other people are going into different notes and stuff. But without that element of that drummer, the piece really isn't the piece that Mozart wrote. And unless that drummer pays attention, this whole piece of music isn't expressed harmoniously. So only the drummer can do the drummer, and the violinist, only the drummer can do the drumming, and the violinist does the violin. Cello does the cello. 100% cello, here and now, nothing but cello. And through that, expressing the whole of the symphony. So a person can't go out and just play the cello piece from whatever the magic flute, or whatever opera, and say, this is Mozart. But it is in a way, but it's a very tiny, tiny piece of it. So I think that statement is somewhat the same. It doesn't negate the greatness of what the Buddha gave us, but and he had to take absolute responsibility for investigating and expressing the Dharma. But without, all beings, and those that came before him, and traditionalists say many, many lifetimes before that, you know, he wouldn't have been able to express what he did. Russ had something?
Oh, it's good to be back. It's good to hear you again. It's good to be back. It seems like every Saturday for like a long time. I just haven't been able to make it, so it's good to be back. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. I haven't. I realized today, and actually I think I have before that. I'm not quite sure I understand the meaning of the term verification. For me, it brings to mind kind of the old tales of way long ago masters or ancestors who, you know, came to a sudden realization, and then they went to their teacher who said, "Oh yeah, you're enlightened." That is verification that seems to be external, and I don't want to make distinctions between Soto or Dogen's way and Rinzai, but it does seem to me to have more connotations that are similar to having a Kensho experience, and you've got to go to a teacher to verify that. And I have a sense that you're using it in a real different way, in the way that you and Nakamura Roshi, you're talking about verification. But I'm not really clear on what that is. So if you could talk a little bit more about verification and what you see it as meaning, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Wes. That's an interesting question. I appreciate that. And, you know, honestly, I would like to go back and see what word those old Rinzai masters use, you know, if it's actually the same word as this show. I don't know, you know, if it is the same word, but I suspect it probably is, but I don't know. But you're right. I think we're obviously, you know, talking about something different than we hear about in those old stories, that one person verifies that you're enlightened. So in one sense, I think it's a much older term, and it simply means, you know, the Buddha said, don't take my word for this teaching. Don't take somebody's word just because they're a teacher or they're from a high caste, or their reputation. Take my teaching and practice it, take it into your life, and verify it that way. So on a personal level, yeah, like just an old level, like for the individual, I think that's what it means. You verify the truth or the veracity of the Dharma by practicing it and expressing it. And I mean, it is probably Dogen Zenji is using it at wordplay, I would guess, too, that somehow the Dharma realm, or all beings, do verify us, you know, the way the Rinzai master. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it's some kind of tongue-in-cheek thing, but I have no idea. It's just a guess. But in some way, to say that no one person can verify your enlightenment. You know, enlightenment itself verifies your enlightenment. You know, so that verification is the reality itself, rather than anything we say about it. You know, all of those things in Dogen Zenji's teaching really point to that direction. But the verification on a personal level is, yes, I see impermanence. I see non-self. You know, I see the reality of the Four Noble Truths, and I realize it. in the way that I, live. This is a wholesome way to express a human life. And so it's kind of traditionally, it's the fruit, of our practice. And so some people would say, oh, it's enlightenment, it's Kensho. But that's, the Buddha never said that. And it's not the point for us to talk about Kensho or not. I think it's more that is awakening, the verification of the practice, the fruit of what the Buddha was teaching. And Dogen Zenji says we're there in the process, that the journey and the practicing, and the reality itself are the verification. But it's an interesting thing, and I'll try to remember to go and see if that's the same word as those old masters use. It probably is, but it's a good question. I appreciate that. Okay, was there anything else we needed to say today before signing off? Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll do our vows, but we can bow one time maybe. Thank you very much.